Humble woman gets kicked out of restaurant soon after her millionaire husband's luxury car arrives. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. Emily adjusted the wooden bead necklace around her neck while observing her reflection in the small bathroom mirror of the New Dawn Community Center. The dark beads, polished by time and constant use, contrasted with her fair skin. That necklace was more than an ornament. It was an inheritance from her grandmother Eleanor, a woman who faced the world with the strength of an oak and the delicacy of a violet. The noise of young people arriving for another day of activities invaded her thoughts. Emily smiled, fixing her brown hair in an improvised bun. There was no time for makeup or elaborate preparation, and honestly there never was. Her beauty was in her simplicity, in the expression lines that told stories of smiles and worries, in the determined look she had inherited from Eleanor. "Miss Emily, the baking class group has arrived," shouted Melissa, her most dedicated assistant, from the other side of the door. "I'm coming," she replied, taking one last look in the mirror. Her faded jeans and basic cotton t-shirt were comfortable and practical, perfect for another day of intense work at the community center she had coordinated for 15 years. Leaving the bathroom, Emily was greeted by the warm embrace of Julia, one of the teenagers from the project. The 16-year-old girl had bright eyes and a contagious smile. "Miss Emily, I did it. I was approved for the kitchen assistant position at Mr. George's restaurant." Emily's heart filled with joy. Julia was another living proof that the work at the community center was worth every second of dedication. The girl, who 6 months ago could barely make a simple cake, was now about to start her professional career. "I'm so proud of you, Julia." "You deserve every achievement," said Emily, hugging her again. Her cell phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a message from Richard, her husband. "Confirmed our reservation for tonight. I'll pick you up at the community center at 8 p.m. Love you." Emily smiled. After 15 years of marriage, Richard still made a point of surprising her with special dinners. She put away her phone, trying not to think too much about the fancy restaurant where they were going. Places like that always made her uncomfortable. The morning flew by between cooking classes, meetings with volunteers, and attending to the young people in the project. Emily coordinated each activity with the precision of a conductor, but without losing the humanity that was her trademark. During lunch, shared with the team in the center's small kitchen, Melissa couldn't stop talking about the new project they were developing, a hospitality services training program for young people in vulnerable situations. "Emily, don't you think we should seek partnerships with more sophisticated restaurants? It would be an incredible opportunity for our students," suggested Melissa, while absent-mindedly stirring her soup. Emily pondered for a few moments, playing with the beads of her necklace between her fingers, a habit she had when she needed to reflect. "Maybe. But we need to find establishments that truly believe in these young people's potential, not just places that want to use our project as social marketing." In the afternoon, while organizing some reports in her small office, Emily found an old photo, she and Richard, much younger, in front of the community center's first space, a tiny room borrowed from a local church. How much time had passed? How many lives transformed since then? When the clock struck 6 p.m., Emily began organizing her things to leave. She had 2 hours to prepare for dinner with Richard. She grabbed her worn jacket, companion of so many, cold mornings, and said goodbye to the team. "Tomorrow we start the new confectionery course module," she reminded the young people who were still at the center. Her words were received with excited smiles and farewell waves. Walking along the uneven sidewalk of the neighborhood, Emily observed the movement of the city. Crowded buses, hurried people, the constant sound of horns, the urban symphony she knew so well. She stopped in front of a store window and adjusted her bead necklace again. Tonight would be special, she thought. Little did she know that dinner would change not only her life, but that of many other people. The Golden House was imposing. Its facade of mirrored glass and Italian marble reflected the last lights of the day, creating a golden spectacle that justified its name. Emily took a deep breath before climbing the 3 steps that led to the main entrance. Her reflection in the polished glass made her hesitate for a moment. The simplicity of her clothes drastically contrasted with the luxurious environment. The maitre d', a tall man with impeccable posture and carefully combed grey hair, received her with a look that mixed disdain and suspicion. His name was Charles, as indicated by the golden badge on his perfectly aligned black jacket. "Good evening. I have a reservation for 8 p.m., said Emily, keeping her voice firm despite the growing discomfort. Charles consulted the tablet in his hands with deliberate slowness. "Under whose name would the reservation be, ma'am?" The ma'am left his lips as if it were a bitter word. "Richard Miller," Emily replied, unconsciously touching her grandmother's necklace. The maitre d' raised an eyebrow, his gaze once more running over Emily's simple clothes. "I'm sorry, but I don't find any reservation under that name. Besides, we are completely booked tonight." Emily frowned, confused. "There must be some mistake. My husband confirmed the reservation today." "Ma'am," Charles began, his condescending tone cutting through the air like a razor, "perhaps you're confusing the establishments. We have a very rigorous policy for reservations and dress code. I suggest you look for a restaurant more suitable to your profile." A young waitress who was nearby organizing some menus observed the scene with growing discomfort. Her name was Amanda, and her eyes revealed a mixture of indignation and sadness. Emily felt her face burn, but she maintained her composure. Years working with people in vulnerable situations had taught her the value of dignity. "I understand. I'll wait for my husband outside then." Leaving the restaurant, Emily sat on a nearby bench. The sky was beginning to darken, and the first stars timidly appeared between the skyscrapers. Her hands found the bead necklace again, and her grandmother Eleanor's voice echoed in her memory. "My daughter, your dignity is not in what you wear, but in what you carry inside your heart." She sent a message to Richard explaining the situation. Minutes later, a black Audi smoothly stopped in front of the restaurant. Richard Miller, one of the country's most respected businessmen, got out of the car with the discreet elegance that characterized him. Tall, athletic, and wearing an impeccable Italian suit, he immediately located Emily. His eyes, normally serene, had a gleam of indignation when he approached his wife. "What happened exactly, love?" Emily calmly reported what had occurred, more concerned about the embarrassment she might cause than with her own humiliation. Richard hugged her tightly, gently kissing her forehead. "Let's go in," he said, his calm voice masking an unshakable determination. Maitre de Charles's face completely transformed when he saw Richard Miller entering the restaurant hand in hand with Emily. His forced smile couldn't hide the panic that was beginning to settle in his eyes. "Mr. Miller, what an honor to receive you. There was a terrible misunderstanding with your reservation. Let me escort you to the best table in the house." Richard raised his hand, interrupting the maitre d's apologetic speech. The silence that followed was deafening. The other clients, realizing that something important was about to happen, stopped their conversations to observe the scene. Amanda, the young waitress, approached discreetly, her heart beating fast. She had witnessed similar scenes before, but something told her that this time would be different. Something was about to change, and she wanted to be part of that change. The silence at the Golden House was palpable. Richard Miller, still firmly holding Emily's hand, stared fixedly at Charles, the maitre d' who had mistreated his wife minutes before. His voice, when he finally spoke, was controlled but carried the weight of 15 years watching his beloved face similar situations. "Charles, isn't it?" Richard began, pointing to the golden badge on the maitre d's jacket. "Let me tell you a story. 20 years ago, a young man from the countryside arrived in this city with a heavy accent and simple clothes. In important meetings, executives would discreetly laugh at his way of speaking. At elegant parties, he was directed to the service entrance because he didn't look like a guest." Emily gently squeezed her husband's hand, recognizing for the first time in public the story he had always kept to himself. Amanda, the young waitress, moved even closer, each word reverberating in her own life experience. "That young man was me," continued Richard, And do you know what saved me? Finding people who saw beyond appearances. Like Emily, who coordinates one of the largest community centers in this city, transforming lives for 15 years without caring about social status. Charles turned, pale, his once haughty face now showing a mixture of shame and recognition. Other restaurant employees approached discreetly, attracted by the intensity of the moment. "Mr. Miller, I apologize, I didn't know that." "That she was my wife?" Richard interrupted, his voice gaining a firmer tone. "And does that make a difference? Respect should be universal, not a privilege reserved for those with an influential surname or a fat bank account." Emily, who until then had been observing in silence, took a step forward. Her wooden bead necklace shone under the restaurant lights, like a symbol of resistance against prejudice. "Richard," she said softly, "perhaps this is the moment to do something bigger than simply pointing out errors." Amanda, gathering all her courage, approached the couple. "Excuse me." Her voice trembled slightly. "I've worked here for 2 years and have witnessed similar situations many times. I always wanted to do something, but I was afraid of losing my job." The entire restaurant was in suspense. Diners had stopped eating, waiters were paralyzed with trays in hand, and even the cooks were peeking through the kitchen doors. "You know," continued Amanda, "I also attend the New Dawn Center. I take English classes there on my days off. I never imagined that the coordinator everyone talks so much about would be—" She gestured toward Emily, her words loaded with admiration. Emily smiled, finally recognizing the young woman she occasionally saw in the center's corridors. "Amanda, right? You always arrive early for Thursday classes." The waitress nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Miss Emily, the center changed my life. I got this job thanks to the customer service course I took there, but here, they still treat people as if they're worth less because of their appearance." Richard observed the interaction with growing interest. His gaze alternated between Amanda, who represented so many young people struggling for opportunities, and Charles, who personified a system that urgently needed change. "Perhaps," said Emily, her tone now revealing the experienced coordinator, "we can transform this moment into something constructive. Charles, have you ever thought about what it would be like to work with young people who dream of entering the gastronomy and hospitality industry but never had a real chance?" The maitre d', who until then had kept his eyes lowered, raised his gaze. Something in his expression had changed. The veneer of superiority was beginning to crack, revealing a man who might also have his own story of struggles. "Actually, I spent years trying to erase my past, thinking I needed to become someone else to be accepted in this world." A murmur ran through the restaurant. Diners exchanged meaningful glances, some nodding in recognition, others visibly uncomfortable with their own prejudiced attitudes. Amanda wiped away the tears that kept falling and took a decisive step forward. "I know a place not far from here, George's Corner. It's simple, but the food is wonderful and the treatment is humane. The owner has an incredible story of overcoming adversity." Richard and Emily exchanged knowing glances. That young waitress had just offered not only an alternative for dinner, but a path to something greater. "Amanda," Emily called gently, "would you like to join us? I think we have a lot to talk about." The waitress looked around, hesitant. Charles, surprising everyone, nodded slightly. "Go, Amanda, your shift was ending anyway." The small group left the Golden House under the watchful eyes of those present. Richard's black Audi seemed out of place when it parked in front of George's Corner, a modest restaurant on a tree-lined street in the neighboring district. The queue, aroma of homemade spices greeted them before they even entered. George, a man in his 50s with a genuine smile and an impeccably white apron, came personally to receive them. His eyes widened when he recognized Emily. "My goodness, Miss Emily, you here?" The emotion in his voice was palpable. "Everyone," he shouted to the kitchen, "come here, come meet the woman who changed my life." As a small crowd of employees gathered, George explained to those present, 15 years ago I was living on the streets. It was the New Dawn Center that welcomed me, that gave me the chance to learn gastronomy. Miss Emily never gave up on me, even when I had given up on myself." Emily, moved, hugged George. "Look at what you've built. This place is wonderful." "And that's not all," George continued proudly. "All my employees are young people in vulnerable situations. We provide training, opportunity, dignity, just like you did for me." Richard observed everything with growing interest, his business brain already formulating possibilities. Amanda, for her part, seemed to have found her place in the world. Her eyes shone as she absorbed every detail of the welcoming environment. "George," Richard began, "I'd like to hear more about your business model. How do you reconcile the Usos team social aspect with financial sustainability?" While the men talked, Emily noticed something special on the wall photos of all the employees, each with their story of overcoming adversity, written on small decorative plaques. It was a mural of dignity, a living testimony that appearances do not define character. Amanda circulated through the restaurant, as if she were at home, conversing with the employees and discovering stories that mirrored her own. At one point, she approached Emily. "Miss Emily, I've made a decision. I'm going to quit the Golden House. I want to work with something that makes sense, that truly transforms lives." Emily smiled, touching her bead necklace. "You know, Amanda, I think the universe conspired to bring us together tonight. We're actually planning a new project at the center, focused on hospitality and gastronomy." At the next table, Richard and George discussed numbers and possibilities with growing enthusiasm. Richard's business experience perfectly complemented George's practical and social knowledge. "What do you think about joining forces?" proposed Richard, his voice loaded with enthusiasm. "We can create a professional training program that combines the experience of the New Dawn Center with real practice in partner establishments." George nodded vigorously. "I'm in, and I can guarantee that several other small restaurants in the region would also join. We all need qualified labor, and there are so many talented young people in need of opportunity." Emily observed the scene with an overflowing heart. What had begun as a night of humiliation was transforming into something much greater. Her gaze met Amanda's, who smiled radiantly while noting ideas on a napkin. "You know what would be incredible?" the young waitress suggested. "A gastronomic festival that would bring together all the partner restaurants of the project. We could show that good food and dignified treatment are not exclusive to expensive places." Ideas flowed like a river after rain. Each person present contributed their unique perspective, building something that promised to be much greater than the sum of its parts. In the air hung the feeling that this night would mark the beginning of a true transformation. Morning arrived with a different energy at the New Dawn Center. Emily opened the curtains in her office, letting the sun illuminate the dozens of colorful posters announcing the new project: gastronomy with dignity, professional training in hospitality and culinary arts. Amanda, who now officially integrated the center's team as assistant coordinator, enthusiastically organized the registration forms. In just 1 week, more than 200 young people had applied to the program. "Miss Emily, look at this application," exclaimed Amanda, holding up one of the forms. "It's from Patricia, that girl who works as a cleaning assistant at the Golden House. She always wanted to be a chef, but never had the opportunity to study." Emily approached, adjusting her inseparable bead necklace. "We'll give special attention to these cases. These are exactly the people who need a little push from destiny." Richard arrived at the center, bringing encouraging news. After numerous meetings with local business people, he had secured not only financial support, but also internship commitments for future students. George, from George's Corner, would be the technical coordinator of the training program. "And there's more," announced Richard, his eyes shining with satisfaction. "Remember Charles, the maitre d'? He resigned from the Golden House and wants to be part of the project. He said it's time to use his experience for something that makes sense." The news caught everyone by surprise. Charles, who had so well represented the prejudice they wanted to combat, now wished to be part of the change. Emily smiled, remembering her grandmother Eleanor's words, "There is no transformation without forgiveness, my child." The first inaugural class of the project was scheduled for that afternoon. The community center's auditorium, normally modest in its activities, had been transformed. Elegantly set tables demonstrated different types of arrangements. The small industrial kitchen shone with donated equipment, and the aroma of fresh coffee gave a special touch to the environment. The first students began to arrive, a mixture of shyness and hope in their gazes. Patricia, the ex-cleaning assistant, carried in her arms a new notebook and a pen, treasures bought especially for the occasion. Charles, wearing a simple dress shirt, very different from the Golden House, suits, waited nervously in a corner. Emily approached him with a welcoming smile. "Welcome to our world, Charles. Here the only etiquette that matters is that of the heart." The ex-maitre d' wiped away a discreet tear. "You know, Miss Emily, I spent so much time pretending to be someone else that I almost forgot who I was. My real name isn't even Charles. It's Carl Davis, son of Mrs. Fay, who sold homemade pies at the market." The revelation deeply touched Emily. How many Carls existed out there, hiding their origins for fear of prejudice? This project needed to be more than a professional course. It needed to be a rescue of identities. George arrived, bringing contagious energy and several forms of homemade bread for the inaugural class. "First lesson," he announced to the students, "is that good food has no social class. It has love, technique, respect for the ingredients and for who will eat it." Amanda circulated among the students, helping with registration forms and sharing her own story of overcoming. Her living example of change inspired confidence in the young people who, like her, dreamed of a different life. At the back of the room, Melissa, Emily's oldest assistant, coordinated the support team. Observing the movement, she couldn't contain her smile. Who would have thought that that night at the fancy restaurant would turn into all this, right? Richard, who had just arrived from another meeting with sponsors, brought exciting news. Large hotel chains had shown interest in hiring future graduates, and an important gastronomy magazine wanted to do a feature on the project. "But there's an interesting detail," he commented to Emily. "They want to do the feature focusing on you on your story with your grandmother's necklace. They say it's a powerful symbol of resistance and transformation." Emily touched the wooden beads, thoughtful. That necklace, which was once a source of shame in elegant environments, was now becoming a symbol of social change. Her grandmother Eleanor would be proud. The inaugural class began with George teaching the fundamentals of kitchen hygiene. Carl, no longer Charles, explained the importance of humanized service. The students absorbed every word, their eyes shining with possibilities never before imagined. The following weeks brought unexpected challenges. The first arose when Patricia, the ex-cleaning assistant, almost gave up the course. Working two jobs to support her family, she could barely keep her eyes open during classes. "I can't let you give up," said Amanda, holding the young student's hands after a particularly difficult class. "Remember my beginning? I also thought I wouldn't make it." Emily, who observed the scene from afar, had an idea. She met with Richard and the project's administrative team to create a scholarship program. It wouldn't be much money, but enough for students like Patricia to reduce their work hours and dedicate themselves to the course. "We'll call it the Eleanor Scholarship," suggested Emily, honoring her grandmother. "To remember that the true legacy we leave in the world are the opportunities we create for others." The scholarship program attracted even more attention to the project. Small business owners in the neighborhood, moved by the students' stories, began to make regular donations. A traditional bakery offered paid internships for 3 students. A supermarket chain began to donate ingredients for practical classes. Carl, increasingly comfortable in his true identity, surprised everyone by revealing a natural talent for teaching. His classes on etiquette and customer service were different from anything he had ever taught at the Golden House. True elegance, he would tell the students, is in making each person feel special, regardless of how much money they have in their pocket. On a particularly busy afternoon, while students practiced different sauce preparation techniques, George gathered the team to share a concern. "I received an interesting call," he began, scratching his head. "The owner of the Golden House wants to talk. It seems that since that night, business at the restaurant has fallen considerably. Many former customers have started frequenting more welcoming places, including my restaurant." Emily and Richard exchanged concerned looks. They didn't want the project to be seen as retaliation or revenge. The idea had always been to build bridges, not walls. "Perhaps," suggested Amanda, "we could turn this into an opportunity. What if we invited them to be partners in the project, show that sophisticated places can also be welcoming?" The suggestion generated a heated debate. Some, like Carl, feared that partnership with luxury restaurants could distort the project's social purpose. Others saw a chance for broader transformation. While the discussion unfolded, Patricia practiced sauces in the experimental kitchen. Her bechamel sauce, once full of lumps, was now perfectly velvety. It was a small victory that represented much more than a mastered technique. It was proof that with opportunity and dedication, any barrier could be overcome. "You know what I think?" interrupted George after tasting Patricia's sauce. "We need to show that good gastronomy doesn't have a fixed address. It can be in a fancy restaurant or in a neighborhood diner. What makes the difference is respect for the food and for people." Emily smiled, recognizing the wisdom in George's simple words. Her gaze swept the kitchen, where students from different backgrounds worked side by side, united by their love for gastronomy and desire for change. Richard, who until then had been listening, in silence had an idea. What if we organized an event? Not a simple gastronomic festival, but a week of integration. Each day a different restaurant, from the simplest to the most sophisticated, would host our students for an exchange of experiences. The idea began to take shape. Amanda already imagined the networking possibilities for the students. Carl saw a chance to reconnect with his former colleagues in the world of high gastronomy, now with a new purpose. "We could call it Flavors of Resistance," Patricia timidly suggested, surprising everyone with her participation. "Because that's what we're doing, isn't it? Resisting prejudice through food." The New Dawn Center was buzzing with preparations for Flavors of Resistance. In her office, Emily coordinated a crucial meeting with the organizing team. The whiteboard was covered with notes, timelines, and lists of participating restaurants. "We've already confirmed 12 establishments," announced Amanda, consulting her digital spreadsheet. From neighborhood bistros to starred restaurants. The Golden House just confirmed participation as well. The news caused a stir in the room. Carl, who was organizing the student registration forms, looked up with interest. "I spoke with some of my former colleagues there. They're genuinely interested in being part of this change." Richard, who had just arrived from another meeting with sponsors, brought even more surprising news. "You won't believe it, but the story of our project has gone viral on social media. A video of the moment we left the Golden House that night has been shared thousands of times." Emily instinctively touched her bead necklace. The internet was full of comments about the woman with the wooden necklace, who faced prejudice with dignity. Messages were coming from all over the country, telling similar stories of discrimination in restaurants and other establishments. "We need to be careful," pondered Emily. "I don't want this to turn into a media circus. The focus needs to remain on student training and social transformation." Patricia, who now interned part-time at George's Corner thanks to the Eleanor Scholarship, timidly raised her hand. "Miss Emily, may I make a suggestion? Why don't we use this visibility to create a broader campaign, something that inspires other places to follow our example?" The young student had blossomed in recent weeks. Her perfect bechamel sauce was just the beginning. She demonstrated a natural talent for flavor harmonization and a unique creativity in creating dishes. "Go on, Patricia," encouraged Amanda, proud to see her protégé speaking up. "I thought about documenting the story of each student, each teacher, each partner restaurant. Show that everyone has something to teach and something to learn. We could call it Stories That Feed." George, who had arrived silently during the discussion, applauded the idea. "Yes, and we can start with Miss Emily's story and Eleanor's necklace. There's a lot of wisdom stored in those wooden beads." Emily felt her face blush. She never liked being the center of attention, but she understood the symbolic power her story had acquired. "I'll only agree if we also start with your story, George. From homeless to restaurant owner and teacher. That's inspiring." The event planning advanced amid surprising discoveries. A student revealed herself to be the daughter of a famous international chef, but had chosen to start her career from the bottom to truly understand the value of work. One of the participating restaurants was managed by a 75-year-old lady who, widowed, had transformed her garage into a prosperous family business. Carl coordinated the service workshops with renewed enthusiasm. His classes now included not only etiquette and protocol, but deep discussions about empathy and humanization of service. "Look," he would say to the students, "how a simple good morning can be said in 1,000 different ways. The secret is in making each person feel truly welcomed." As the date of the event approached, new challenges emerged. The logistics of transporting students between different restaurants, coordinating schedules, the equitable distribution of learning opportunities. But for each problem, the team found a creative solution. Richard surprised everyone by announcing he had secured a fleet of vans for student transportation. "These are entrepreneurs who were touched by our cause. Each van will have the project, logo and the drawing of Eleanor's necklace." Amanda coordinated communication between participating restaurants with the efficiency of someone who knew both sides of the story. The reality of luxury establishments and the daily struggle of small entrepreneurs. At the end of another intense day of preparations, Emily found a moment of quietude in her office. Observing the photos of students on the mural, each face telling a story of overcoming, she felt the weight of the responsibility they carried. Her phone rang. It was a message from a journalist from an important gastronomy magazine. They wanted to do a special feature on the project, focusing on the stories of transformation. The suggested title was "The Flavor Revolution: How a Wooden Necklace is Changing American Gastronomy." A week before the start of Flavors of Resistance, the New Dawn Community Center received an unexpected visit. Marina Torres, the renowned food critic, walked through the main corridor with her characteristic elegance, carefully observing every detail of the environment. Emily received her in her simple office, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the smell of fresh bread coming from the experimental kitchen. The contrast between the simplicity of the place and the sophistication of the visitor didn't go unnoticed by either of them. "Miss Emily," Marina began, adjusting her designer glasses, "I confess I came here skeptical, but there's something special happening between these walls." During the morning, Marina followed the practical classes. She observed Patricia executing advanced French pastry techniques with precision. She watched Carl teaching the difference between serving and welcoming. She tasted the dishes prepared by the students and, to everyone's surprise, asked for some recipes. "You know," she commented during lunch prepared by the students, "in 20 years as a food critic, I've learned that true excellence is not just in technique, but in the soul that goes into the preparation." Amanda, who served the tables with the resourcefulness of someone born for it, shared her experiences from both sides of the counter with the students. "Each customer is a walking story," she taught. "Our mission is to be part of that story in a positive way." In the middle of the afternoon, Richard arrived with more news. Large hotel chains inspired by the project were creating similar programs in other cities. The movement that had begun with an act of discrimination was transforming into a national wave of change. "And there's more," he announced, barely containing his enthusiasm. "I received an invitation to present the project at the country's largest gastronomy fair. They want to create an inclusive gastronomy seal for establishments that adopt practices similar to ours." Marina, who listened attentively to everything, made an insightful observation. "You're not just training professionals, you're creating a new gastronomic culture." George, who was preparing the students for another practical class, smiled upon hearing the comment. "Do you know what the secret ingredient of every successful dish is? Respect. Respect for the ingredients, for the process, and mainly for the people." The food critic spent the rest of the afternoon interviewing students and teachers. Each story she heard impressed her more. There was the young man who grew up in a shelter and dreamed of opening a bed and breakfast. the lady who sold cakes on the street and now mastered high patisserie, the teenager who exchanged informal work for a future in gastronomy. "Miss Emily," Marina called before leaving, "I need to make a confession to you. I came here thinking of writing just another article, but I'm leaving with a mission. I'm going to propose a special series on social gastronomy to the magazine, starting with Flavors of Resistance." Emily touched her bead necklace, moved. "Marina, each bead on this necklace represents a story of resistance. My grandmother Eleanor used to say that true wealth is in the stories we choose to tell." That night, after everyone had left, Emily remained in her office, rereading the registrations for the event. Each form contained more than data. It contained dreams, hopes, possibilities. The phone rang. It was Richard. "Love, you won't believe it." His voice overflowed with enthusiasm. "The project video has reached 1 million views. People from all over the country are sharing their own stories of overcoming through gastronomy." The news was both exciting and frightening. The project had grown beyond their initial expectations. Now it wasn't just about transforming lives through gastronomy. It was about changing the way society saw people's value. Amanda entered the room carrying a mysterious box. "Miss Emily, look what arrived. These are necklaces inspired by yours, made by artisans from a local community. They want to donate them to all the participants of the event." Inside the box were dozens of wooden bead necklaces, each one unique, each one telling its own story. Emily picked up one of them, feeling the familiar texture between her fingers. It was as if her grandmother Eleanor was there, smiling, approving every step of that journey. The sun had barely risen when Emily arrived at the New Dawn Center on that historic morning. It was the first day of Flavors of Resistance, and the energy in the air was almost palpable. Dozens of students were already waiting in the courtyard, all wearing new uniforms and carrying the artisanal bead necklaces that had become a symbol of the movement. Patricia, who would be one of the protagonists of the inaugural day, nervously adjusted her white chef's jacket. She had been chosen to lead the team that would prepare lunch at the Golden House, a twist of fate that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. "Calm down," whispered Amanda, adjusting the young chef's badge. "Remember what George always says? The best recipe is made with confidence." The personalized vans began to arrive, parking in a row in the center's courtyard. Each one proudly displayed the project logo, a stylized bead necklace forming the profile of a stove. Richard personally supervised the boarding of the students, ensuring that each group went to their designated destination. "Everyone," called Emily, gathering all in a circle for a moment of reflection. "Today is not just the first day of an event. It's the first day of a new history in American gastronomy. Each of you carries not only techniques and knowledge, but values that will transform lives." Carl, elegant in his new instructor uniform, distributed the final guidelines to his team. They weren't just rules of etiquette, they were principles of humanity. "Remember, when we serve with our hearts, elegance comes naturally." The first group departed toward the Golden House. Patricia, at the front of the team, carried with her not only her work tools, but also the hopes of all who believed in transformation through gastronomy. At the restaurant, the reception was surprising. The entire team, including Carl's former colleagues, waited at the entrance. The current maitre d', a young man named Philip, extended his hand to Patricia with genuine respect. "Our kitchen is yours today," he said. "We're here to learn as much as to teach." The Golden House kitchen, with its state-of-the-art equipment and impeccable organization, would intimidate anyone. But Patricia, taking a deep breath and touching her bead necklace, began to distribute tasks with the confidence of a true leader. Her menu had been carefully planned, a fusion of haute cuisine with popular American flavors. The main dish was a sophisticated reinterpretation of the seafood stew her grandmother had taught her to make, served with coconut rice prepared using the pilaf method. Meanwhile, at other points in the city, similar scenes unfolded. At George's Corner, students from the Golden House learned the importance of family welcome. In bistros and partner restaurants, social barriers were being broken down through the universal language of food. Emily circulated between establishments, documenting each moment. In her bag, she carried a small notebook where she noted the stories she witnessed. The starred chef learning a seasoning technique from a lady from the outskirts. The sommelier discovering the unique flavors of natural juices prepared by a young entrepreneur. At the Golden House, the crucial moment was approaching. The first customers were beginning to arrive for lunch, many of them attracted by curiosity about the project that had gone viral on social media. Among them, Marina Torres, the food critic, who made a point of personally trying the menu created by Patricia. The service flowed with surprising harmony. Patricia's team, mixing project, students and restaurant employees worked in perfect sync. Each dish that left the kitchen carried not only flavors, but a message of transformation. Richard, who followed everything discreetly from a table in the corner, couldn't contain his pride. His phone didn't stop receiving messages from other entrepreneurs interested in replicating the project in their cities. Amanda circulated among the tables, guiding the students in service, but also collecting impressions from customers. The reactions were unanimous. Something special was happening at that lunch. When the first service ended, Patricia gathered her team in the kitchen. Her eyes shone with emotion as she thanked each one. The executive chef of the Golden House, who had observed everything in silence, asked to speak. "In 20 years of profession," he said, "I've never seen such a harmonious kitchen. You not only prepared exceptional dishes, you taught us a new way of doing gastronomy." Emily, who had arrived in time to witness that moment, felt tears flowing. Her bead necklace, Eleanor's inheritance, seemed to shine with its own light. The transformation her grandmother had always dreamed of was finally happening, one dish at a time. The news of the success of the first day of Flavors of Resistance spread quickly. Social media was buzzing with photos and comments, especially about Patricia's surprising performance at the Golden House. Marina Torres, the food critic, had already published a first impression on her blog with the title, "The Revolution Begins in the Kitchen." The next morning, the New Dawn Center was even busier. Journalists from different outlets competed for space to record the departure of students for the second day of activities. Emily, maintaining her characteristic discretion, delegated the interviews to Amanda and Carl, who had become true spokespersons for the project. "The most important thing," Amanda explained to a reporter, "is that we're not just teaching culinary techniques. We're building bridges between worlds that seemed impossible to connect." Carl, who conducted a group of visitors through the center, completed, "Each person carries a unique story, a flavor of their own. Our mission is to create an environment where all these flavors can harmonize." The second day of the event would bring new challenges. The students who had started at the Golden House would now go to small establishments in the neighborhood, while those who started in popular restaurants would have their chance in more sophisticated environments. Richard arrived early, bringing news that stirred the spirits even more. Major television networks wanted to make special coverage of the project. "But," he assured Emily, "I only accepted on the condition that the focus be on the stories of transformation, not on the spectacle." Patricia, still radiant with the success of the previous day, prepared for her new mission. Coordinating lunch at George's Corner, her seafood stew had become a sensation on social networks, with customers from the Golden House sharing photos and praise. "You know, Miss Emily," she said, adjusting her bead necklace, "yesterday I understood something you've always tried to teach us. It doesn't matter where we're cooking. What matters is the respect we put into each preparation." George, who prepared his kitchen to receive the day's students, smiled with paternal pride. His small restaurant, once threatened by debts, now had a waiting list for reservations. But what moved him most was seeing his former street companions being inspired by the project's story. "Last night," he told Emily, 3 homeless people came to the restaurant, not asking for food, but asking how they could participate in the next training cycle." Amanda coordinated the day's logistics with the efficiency of someone born to lead. Her transformation from insecure waitress to respected manager was one of the stories that most inspired new students. "Each challenge is an opportunity for growth," she repeated, guiding the groups that departed for their activities. There are no better or worse places. There are different ways of making people happy through food. Mid-morning, an exciting surprise. Mrs. Fay, Carl's mother, arrived at the center bringing her famous homemade pies. The lady, who still sold at the weekend market, had been invited to give a special class on informal entrepreneurship. "My son was ashamed of his pie maker mother," she commented, drawing emotional laughs from the audience. "Today he understands that every pie I sold helped pay for his studies and that there is no undignified work. There are people who treat others with indignity." Mrs. Fay's speech deeply touched those present. Carl, who had spent years trying to hide his origins, now celebrated them with pride. His workshop on humanized service included stories from his childhood at the market, demonstrating how each life experience contributed to forming a more complete professional. Emily observed everything with an overflowing heart. Her bead necklace, Eleanor's gift, had multiplied into dozens of other necklaces, each carrying new stories of overcoming and dignity. The wooden beads, once a symbol of simplicity, now represented a silent revolution in American gastronomy. Richard, who had just returned from another meeting with partners, found his wife in a moment of reflection. "You know, love," he said, hugging her from behind, "I think your grandmother Eleanor is somewhere very proud of what you've started here." "It's not just ours anymore," replied Emily, moved. "Now it belongs to all who believe that food can be a tool for social transformation. Each dish served with dignity is a victory against prejudice." The third day of Flavors of Resistance began with a surprise. Early in the morning, an unmarked van parked in front of the New Dawn Community Center. From it descended a group of executives from one of the country's largest hotel chains, led by Sofia Mendez, operations director known for her influence in the hotel sector. Emily, who was organizing the day's groups with Amanda, observed the movement with curiosity. Richard, who had kept that visit a secret, smiled discreetly while leading the visitors through the center. "Miss Emily," called Sophia, extending her hand in greeting. "We've closely followed the development of your project. What you're doing here goes far beyond gastronomy. You're redefining the concept of hospitality." The executive didn't waste time with small talk. Her proposal was ambitious: to implement the Flavors of Resistance model throughout the hotel chain, creating similar training centers in different states across the country. "But," emphasized Sophia, "we want to do this while maintaining the essence of the project. The dignity, respect, appreciation of individual stories. It can't be just another social responsibility program." Patricia, who was passing by carrying ingredients for her class of the day, stopped upon hearing the conversation. Her success at the Golden House had become a case study, the young woman who went from cleaning assistant to respected chef in a matter of months. "Excuse the intrusion," she said, adjusting her bead necklace, "but I think I can contribute to this conversation. What I learned here wasn't just culinary arts, it was discovering my worth as a person." Emily smiled, proud. Patricia had become not only an excellent chef, but a true leader. Her story inspired other students to believe in their potential. "That's exactly what we're talking about," agreed Sophia. "We want to create real opportunities for transformation, and we're willing to invest seriously in this." The meeting continued in Emily's small office, now cramped with so many important people. Amanda presented the preliminary results of the project: numbers of graduates, employability rate, impact on communities. Carl, who had arrived for his etiquette class, was invited to participate. His transformation from prejudiced maitre d' to humanized educator was another case that drew attention. "True luxury," he explained to the executives, "is not in silver cutlery or crystal glasses. It's in the way we make each person feel special and respected." George arrived bringing a special breakfast prepared by the project's students. While the executives tasted treats that mixed refined techniques with popular flavors, he shared his vision. "Each dish tells a story," he said, serving naturally fermented breads made with French techniques and filled with regional ingredients. "And each story deserves to be told with respect." Sophia and her team were impressed not only with the quality of the food, but with the learning and transformation environment that permeated the center. In every corner, there were stories of overcoming and dignity. "But I have a concern," expressed Emily, always thoughtful. "How do we ensure that this expansion won't mischaracterize the project? How do we maintain the essence when we grow to a national scale?" Richard, who had remained more of an observer during the meeting, had a proposal. What if we created a management council, formed by people who lived the transformation firsthand, like Patricia, Amanda, and George? The idea was received with enthusiasm. Sophia immediately suggested that the first training centers be implemented in regions with high rates of social vulnerability. "We can start with 5 cities, she proposed, each one adapting the project to its local reality, but maintaining the fundamental principles. Amanda, always practical, was already starting to take notes. "We need to document the entire methodology. Create a manual that isn't just technical, but that transmits the values and philosophy of the project." While the meeting unfolded, the center continued in full activity. Students came and went, preparing for another day of exchange in partner restaurants. The aroma of fresh bread and diverse seasonings filled the air. Emily touched her bead necklace, thoughtful. The expansion of the project would bring new challenges, but also the opportunity to multiply Eleanor's legacy even more. Each bead on the necklace seemed to pulse with the possibilities that were opening up. "Let's do it," she finally decided, but with one condition: each new center needs to have its own bead necklace, not as a registered trademark, but as a constant reminder that true transformation begins in recognizing the dignity of each person. Sophia smiled, understanding the depth of that simple but powerful symbol. "Miss Emily, I think we've just started a revolution in American hospitality, and it begins with wooden beads." The news of the national expansion of the project quickly ran through the corridors of the new Dawn Center. Between pots and stoves, students and teachers discussed the possibilities that were opening up. But it was during Patricia's class that a crucial question arose. "Miss Patricia," questioned one of the youngest students, "with all this growth, won't we lose our essence? Won't it just become another technical course?" The young chef, who was preparing a lesson on mother sauces of French cuisine, paused for a moment. Her gaze found the bead necklace she now wore with such pride. "I'll tell you a story," she began, lowering the heat on the bechamel sauce she was demonstrating. "When I was a cleaning assistant at the Golden House, I dreamed of being a chef. But it wasn't just about cooking. It was about being treated with dignity." The entire room listened in silence, the gentle bubbling of the sauce as background music. Emily, who was passing through the corridor, stopped to discreetly listen at the door. "What I learned here," continued Patricia, "was that each recipe carries history. This bechamel sauce I'm making, in France it's the base of haute cuisine, but do you know who I learned to make it perfectly from? Mrs. Fay, Carl's mother, who uses the same technique of constant stirring in her pie filling. Amanda, who had arrived to give an announcement, smiled upon hearing the comparison. She herself had discovered that many refined techniques had parallels in popular cuisine. The project is growing," Patricia continued, now adding nutmeg to the sauce. "But our essence is in the stories we carry, in the beads of the necklace, as Miss Emily always says." At that same moment, in another part of the center, Carl was conducting a meeting with the first instructors who would go to other cities. His workshop on humanized service had been transformed into a complete training program. "We're not just teaching how to serve," he explained. "We're showing how to welcome. And this begins with self-knowledge, with pride in our origins." Richard, who participated in the meeting, complimented, "Each city will have its own identity within the project. The important thing is to maintain the fundamental values: respect, dignity, and social transformation." At George's corner, a line was forming at the door. The small restaurant had become a meeting point for people interested in knowing the project's story. George, faithful to his mission, transformed each meal into an opportunity for awareness. "Here we don't just sell food," he would say to customers. "We serve hope with a pinch of social revolution." Emily gathered the entire team at the end of that afternoon. The sun entered through the center's windows, creating a play of light and shadow with the beads of the necklaces that everyone now wore. "Each bead of this necklace she began, her voice loaded with emotion, represents a story of overcoming. My grandmother Eleanor used to say that the true inheritance is not in the jewels we leave, but in the lives we transform. Amanda presented the first draft of the project manual. It wasn't just a set of rules and procedures, it was a compendium of stories, values, and dreams. Each new center will have autonomy to adapt the techniques to its reality, she explained. But the principles are non-negotiable. Every human being deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance or origin. Patricia, still wearing her chef's apron, shared her decision. I'm going to the first center in New Orleans. I want to show that it's possible to unite haute cuisine with popular knowledge. The news caught everyone by surprise, but it made sense. Patricia had become a living symbol of the transformation that the project provided. Her going to New Orleans would be the first concrete step of the expansion. And I'm not going alone, she continued. 3 students from my class were also invited. We'll form the first team of multipliers for the project. Carl was moved to announce that his mother, Mrs. Fay, would be a special consultant for the project. Her expertise in transforming simple ingredients into extraordinary dishes would be fundamental to maintaining the connection with the popular roots of gastronomy. My mother always said, he shared, that the best food is that made with love and served with respect. Now I understand that she wasn't just talking about culinary arts, she was teaching a philosophy of life. The sun was already setting when Emily finally returned to her office. On her desk, a surprise, an album of old photos, a gift from Richard. On the first page, a photo of her grandmother Eleanor, wearing the original bead necklace, smiling in front of a wood stove. The New Dawn Center was experiencing days of intense transformation. A week before Patricia's departure to New Orleans, the place had become a true headquarters of change. In each room, different groups worked on preparations for the national expansion of the project. In the experimental kitchen, Patricia conducted special training with the students who would accompany her. Among them was Jason, a 19-year-old young man who 6 months ago was living on the streets and now stood out in French pastry. "Chef," asked Jason, while finishing a perfectly caramelized crème brûlée, "how are we going to adapt these French techniques to the reality of New Orleans?" Patricia smiled, adjusting her bead necklace. "That's where the magic of our proposal comes in, Jason. We'll use local spices in place of French butter in some dishes, corn flour in place of wheat flour. The technique is universal, but the flavor is ours." In another room, Amanda coordinated the production of teaching materials with a team of educators. On the walls, maps of the United States marked the points where the new centers would be implemented: New Orleans, Miami, Portland, Chicago, and Austin. Each region has its own gastronomic identity, she explained, pointing to a mural of photographs. "Our mission is to create bridges between the traditional and the contemporary, always maintaining respect as the main ingredient." Emily went from room to room, observing the movement with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The project had grown beyond her most optimistic expectations, but each new step brought with it the responsibility of keeping the essence of the work alive. In her office, a surprise awaited her, a letter from an 82-year-old lady, Mrs. Judith, who sold sweets on the coast of Florida. "My granddaughter showed me the video of the project," said the letter, handwritten on simple paper. "For the first time in my life, I felt that my knowledge of traditional sweets has value beyond the streets." Richard, who was arriving from another meeting with partners, found his wife moved with the letter in her hands. "Do you know what this means?" asked Emily, showing Mrs. Judith's message. "We need to create a specific program for masters of popular cuisine." The idea quickly took shape. Carl, who was passing through the corridor, heard the conversation and entered the room enthusiastically. "Why didn't we think of this before? We can create a bank of traditional knowledge, document recipes that are being lost." The buzz attracted George, who brought with him a novelty. His small restaurant had been approached by an important international gastronomy magazine. They wanted to do a feature on how a simple establishment was revolutionizing the concept of gastronomic training. "But I said the article can't be just about me," explained George, his eyes shining. "It has to talk about the whole movement, about how we're changing lives through food." In the center's courtyard, a group of artisans worked on the production of necklaces that would be sent to the new centers. Each piece was unique, made with different woods representing the diversity of the project. Each bead has a story, explained Mrs. Mary, the most experienced artisan. We use repurposed woods, transforming what would be discarded into a symbol of dignity. Patricia gathered her team for a special moment, the creation of the inaugural menu for the New Orleans Center. Each dish would be a fusion between classic techniques and local ingredients. Let's make a tasting menu that tells our story, she proposed. Starting with a reinterpretation of jambalaya using French emulsion techniques, passing through a deconstructed gumbo, until we reach a dessert that mixes crème brûlée with southern pecan pie. Emily, who was watching the discussion, felt her heart overflow with pride. Patricia wasn't just replicating a project, she was creating something new, maintaining the essence, but allowing it to grow organically. At the end of that afternoon, an improvised ceremony gathered everyone in the courtyard. Carl had brought his mother, Mrs. Fay, who prepared special pies for the occasion. Amanda distributed the new necklaces to the team that would depart for New Orleans. Each bead of this necklace, said Emily, her voice choked with emotion, carries a fair bit of the story we began here, but there's also space for the new stories you'll create. Jason, the former street boy, now a pastry chef, held his necklace with reverence. Miss Emily, I promise we'll do in New Orleans what you did for us. Here, give a chance to those who never had a chance. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in orange tones that resembled the fire of the stoves, where so many lives had been transformed. In the air, the aroma of Mrs. Fay's pies mingled with the dreams and hopes of all those present. The day of the departure of the first group to New Orleans dawned with a special energy. The new Dawn Center was decorated with colorful ribbons, and the aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the smell of bread coming from the oven. Emily arrived early, finding Patricia already in the kitchen, organizing her personal tools. The young chef had spent the night finalizing a special recipe book, her own contribution to the new center. You know, Miss Emily, said Patricia, showing the handcrafted book, each recipe here has a story. I included not just the techniques, but also what each dish means to us. The book was a work of art. Besides the recipes, it contained photos, student stories, and small sachets with samples of spices. On the first page, a photo of Eleanor's original bead necklace, with a quote that Emily always repeated, "True gastronomy nourishes more than the body. It nourishes dignity." Amanda coordinated the moving logistics with her usual efficiency. The vans that would take the team to the airport were already parked in the courtyard, being loaded with equipment and teaching materials. Each center will receive an initial kit, she explained to Sophia, who had arrived for the farewell. Besides the basic equipment, we included symbolic elements, a set of artisanal necklaces, a book of project stories, and seeds of aromatic herbs from our garden. Richard surprised everyone by arriving with a novelty. He had managed to ensure that each center would have a small community garden. It's not just about cultivating ingredients, he explained. It's about understanding the complete cycle of food, from the earth to the plate. Carl, who would be responsible for training the service teams of the new centers, gathered his group for final guidance. Remember, he said, we're not just teaching people to serve, we're teaching them to welcome, to respect, to transform lives. Jason, arranging his pastry tools, found a folded note in his apron. It was a message from Mrs. Fay. My son, when you make your French pastries there in New Orleans, don't forget to put a little taste of home in them. That's what makes the difference. The young pastry chef smiled, moved. In his suitcase, besides the professional utensils, he carried a small wooden pestle that he had received as a gift from Carl's mother, a bridge between the traditional and the contemporary. George arrived bringing a surprise. He had prepared special snacks for the journey, each one wrapped with a message of encouragement. Food isn't just sustenance, he said, distributing the packages. It's memory, it's affection, it's strength to move forward. Emily gathered everyone for one last moment of reflection before departure. The center's courtyard was packed. Besides the team that would travel, dozens of students, teachers, and supporters had arrived to say goodbye. "When we started this project," she said, touching her necklace, "our dream was to create opportunities for people who, like me, have been judged by their appearance. Today I see that we've created much more than that. We've created a family, a support network, a movement of transformation." Patricia took the floor next. "Each of us carries not only techniques and knowledge, but a mission to prove that gastronomy can be an instrument of social change, that there are no places or people more or less worthy of respect." Amanda distributed the last documents, contracts, insurance, emergency contacts, but along with the official papers, she also delivered a digital photo album documenting the project's journey from the beginning. "To remind us where we came from," she explained, "and not lose the essence of what we built here." The moment of departure arrived. Tight hugs, barely contained tears, promises to keep in touch. Emily observed everything with her heart tight with pride and anticipated nostalgia. Richard hugged his wife by the shoulders as the vans departed. "Do you know what your grandmother Eleanor would say now?" he asked softly. Emily smiled, the beads of her necklace shining under the morning sun. She would say that every flight begins with a courageous step, and that the best stories are those that inspire other people to write their own. In the sky, a plane cut the horizon, carrying with it not just people and equipment, but dreams, hopes, and the certainty that true transformation begins when we make space for each person to tell their own story. 1 month after the first group's departure to New Orleans, the New Dawn Center buzzed with news from the new centers. Emily was in a video conference with the teams from the 5 cities, each screen showing smiling faces wearing the now iconic bead necklaces. "In Portland," reported the local coordinator, "we discovered a 90-year-old lady who knows ancestral techniques for preparing wild berries. We're documenting the entire process and including it in our bank of traditional knowledge." Patricia, directly from New Orleans, couldn't contain her pride as she showed her students in action. "You need to meet Mary Beth," she said, turning the camera to a lady in her 60s. "She sold jambalaya for 40 years and now is revolutionizing our way of thinking about Louisiana cuisine." Mary Beth, shy but determined, showed a reinterpretation of jambalaya she had created with French techniques learned in the course. "We ain't losing tradition," she explained. "We're enriching it with new knowledge." In Chicago, the project had established an unusual partnership with small urban farmers from the outskirts. Community gardens provided fresh ingredients for the training centers, creating a sustainable cycle of production and consumption. "But the most incredible thing," said Amanda, who coordinated the national expansion, "is how each center is developing its own identity without losing the essence of the project." In Austin, a group of young Native Americans had enrolled in the program. Their ancestral food preparation techniques were being incorporated into the curriculum, creating a unique dialogue between tradition and innovation. Richard, who was following the meeting, shared impressive numbers. In just 1 month, more than 1,000 students had enrolled in the new centers. Local companies were offering partnerships, and municipal governments were showing interest in replicating the model. "But the number that makes me most proud," he said, "is 0. 0 cases of discrimination reported in our partner establishments. Respect is becoming the rule, not the exception." In Miami, a particular story was drawing attention. A former domestic worker, Mrs. Severina, had become a teacher of traditional sweets. Her knowledge of coconut candies and key lime pies was now valued as much as French patisserie techniques. "You know what Mrs. Severina told me," shared the local coordinator, "that for the first time in her life she doesn't feel like just a cook, but a master of knowledge." Emily listened to each report with an overflowing heart. Her bead necklace, Eleanor's inheritance, had multiplied into hundreds of others, each carrying new stories of transformation and dignity. Carl, who traveled between the centers, providing training and humanized service, reported a significant change in the sector. Large restaurants are reviewing their codes of conduct. The case of the Golden House has become an example of how not to act and how it's possible to change. In New Orleans, Jason, the young pastry chef, had created a dessert that went viral on social media. a croissant filled with pecan praline, using French fermentation techniques but completely southern ingredients. "We're proving," he said proudly, displaying his creation through the camera, "that there's no rich people's food or poor people's food. There's well-made food with respect and love." George, who followed the expansion as a special consultant, noticed something interesting. Each center was naturally developing its own version of George's Corner, spaces where gastronomy and social transformation walked together. In Portland, he recounted, there's Mary's Corner. In New Orleans, Jason's Porch, each with its own identity but all with the same purpose. The meeting extended for hours, with each center sharing its achievements and challenges. In common, all reported how the project was changing not only the lives of students, but the entire local gastronomic culture. Sophia, who participated representing the partner hotel chain, made an important announcement. "We're creating a special certification for establishments that adopt the principles of the project. It's not just about food, it's about dignity, respect, and social transformation." At the end of the video conference, Emily asked everyone to show their necklaces. On the screen, dozens of bead necklaces shone, each telling a unique story of overcoming and change. "My grandmother Eleanor," she said, moved, "used to say that a single bead is just a piece of wood, but several beads together form something greater, something that unites and transforms. Looking at you today, I perfectly understand what she meant." The National Gastronomy Fair was approaching, and with it, the opportunity to present the results.
Inviti بتدرسي وبني سسبسي بني تيجي في تيكونس شوتني في scenes.
Each center will have its own space, she explained to the assembly team, but all will be connected by a common element, a large artistic installation made with bead necklaces. The artist responsible for the installation was Lucia, a former student of the project who had discovered her talent for art while decorating dishes. Her project would transform hundreds of necklaces into a structure that, seen from above, would form the map of the United States. Each region will be represented by necklaces made with local woods, explained Lucia, showing the designs. It's a way of showing how diversity strengthens us. From New Orleans, Patricia coordinated her team's participation by video call. Her students had prepared a special menu that told the project's story through flavors: jambalaya appetizer with French technique, main course fusing gumbo with nouvelle cuisine, and dessert blending southern sweets with patisserie. But the most important thing, she emphasized, is that each dish will be served with its story. We want people not only to eat, but to understand the transformation behind each flavor. In Portland, the local team had developed an innovative project with coastal communities. Young fishermen were learning contemporary cooking techniques to enhance the value of lesser-known Pacific fish. "We're calling it river flavors," said the Oregon coordinator. "Each dish tells the story of a river, of a people, of a tradition that deserves to be preserved." The Austin group would bring a special presentation on the integration of Native American techniques into the contemporary menu. A young Apache woman, Jassy, had become a highlight by creating dishes that respected the sacred ingredients of her people. "Before," Jassy said in a promotional video, "our knowledge was seen as folklore. Now it's recognized as ancestral gastronomy." Emily observed the preparations with a mixture of pride and responsibility. The project had grown beyond her most optimistic expectations, but each new step needed to be taken with the same care as the first. Richard arrived with another surprise. The fair would be broadcast live to the entire country. "It's our chance," he said, "to show that social transformation through gastronomy is not utopia, it's reality." Carl, who prepared his team for public service during the event, had developed a special protocol. Each visitor will be received as the only person in the world at that moment, he instructed. Exactly how Mrs. Fay received customers at her pie stand. George, who would coordinate the space dedicated to the corners spread throughout the country, prepared a special surprise, a short documentary showing how each unit had adapted the concept to its local reality. In Miami, he recounted, moved, the corner became a cultural center. Besides food, there's storytelling, music, art, all born from the community. A few days before the event, news stirred the spirits even more. The Golden House, the unwitting protagonist of the beginning of this story, had requested a space at the fair. They wanted to present their own process of transformation. They invited Patricia to be a guest chef for a day, Amanda told, barely containing her smile. The same restaurant that rejected her now recognizes her as a reference. On the eve of the fair, Emily gathered all the teams via video conference for a special moment. Each center had prepared a wooden bead that together would form a new necklace, the first made collaboratively by all units. This necklace, said Emily, showing the newly assembled piece, represents our union. Each bead bears the mark of a region, a story, a transformation. Together they remind us that true gastronomy knows no social boundaries. Sophia, who followed the preparations, made a surprising announcement. The hotel chain was creating an international scholarship fund. The best students of the project would have the chance to study at culinary schools in France, Italy, and Japan. But with one condition, she emphasized, they need to return and multiply the knowledge in their centers of origin. Because true success is not in leaving, it's in returning and transforming your reality. Night fell over the convention center where the fair would be held. In the final assembly of the space, Lucia gave the finishing touches to her necklace installation. Seen from afar, the work seemed to pulse with its own life, each bead reflecting the ambient lights like small wooden stars. The first day of the Irontour National Gastronomy Fair began with a contagious energy. The project space, with its impressive installation of necklaces forming the map of the United States, attracted curious glances from the early hours of the morning. Emily, wearing her original Eleanor necklace, received the first visitors alongside Amanda. The young woman who was once a discriminated waitress now coordinated a team of 50 people, all wearing the necklaces that had become a symbol of transformation. "Welcome to the Flavors of Resistance space," announced Amanda, her voice carrying the pride of someone who knew every detail of the story. Here, each dish has a purpose. Each flavor tells a story of overcoming. The 5 centers had set up tasting stations, each representing the particularities of its region. In Portland, the river flavors presented Pacific fish prepared with contemporary techniques by young fishermen. Mary Beth, the jambalaya seller, from New Orleans who now mastered French techniques, commanded her station with the dignity of an award-winning chef. Her gourmet jambalaya, served with a bechamel sauce with local spices, caused lines and sighs of approval. The secret, she explained to the enchanted visitors, isn't just in the technique or the ingredient. It's in the respect for the history that each food carries. In the Austin space, JC, the young Apache woman, presented dishes that fused her ancestral knowledge with contemporary gastronomy. Her cream of pine nuts with French patisserie techniques was revolutionizing concepts. "Each dish I serve," she said, touching her bead necklace, "is a way to keep alive the memory of my people and show that traditional knowledge is as valuable as any modern technique." Richard circulated through the event with a group of international business people. The project had caught the attention of social investors from various countries interested in replicating the model beyond American borders. "The most impressive thing," he explained, "is not just the practical results, but how we've managed to create a movement of social transformation through gastronomy." Carl coordinated the space dedicated to humanized service, where former students demonstrated in practice how respect and dignity could transform the gastronomic experience. "See," he demonstrated to a group of restaurant managers, "how a simple gesture of welcome can completely change the customer's perception. It's not about reverence, it's about recognition." George, in his corners space, proudly exhibited a digital map showing all establishments inspired by his model. Small, luminous points spread across the United States indicated each place where social gastronomy was changing realities. "Each light on this map," he explained, moved, represents a transformed community, a place where food is more than sustenance. It's an instrument of change. Patricia, who had specially returned from New Orleans for the event, was preparing for her most challenging moment, a special dinner at the Golden House, now as a guest. "Chef, it's not about revenge or proving a point," she explained to the journalists surrounding her. "It's about showing that talent and ability have no social class, that opportunity is all some people need to shine." Lucia's artistic installation became one of the most photographed spots at the fair. Visitors stopped to observe how each necklace told a different story, but together they formed a unique narrative of transformation. "Each bead," explained the artist, "was made by someone who went through the project. They are small testimonies of change that, united, form something greater." At the end of the afternoon, a special moment moved everyone. Mrs. Fay, Carl's mother, was invited for a demonstration of her famous pies. At her side, a renowned French chef humbly learned the techniques she had developed in decades of work. At the market, "See, my son," she said to Carl, who watched proudly, "your pie maker mother now teaches a French chef. The world goes around, doesn't it?" Emily observed everything with an overflowing heart. Her bead necklace, Eleanor's gift, had been transformed into a national symbol of resistance and dignity. Each person who passed through the project's space left not only with new flavors, but with a new perspective on the transformative power of gastronomy. A young journalist approached her, curious about the original necklace. "Miss Emily, did you imagine that moment of discrimination at the restaurant would transform into all this?" Emily smiled, touching the wooden beads that her grandmother had worn. "My grandmother Eleanor always said that the greatest transformations begin in the most unlikely moments. The important thing is to maintain dignity and transform pain into strength to change the world." The second day of the fair brought even bigger surprises. Early in the morning, a long line formed in front of the project's space. The reason? Patricia would return from her triumphant dinner at the Golden House for a special masterclass. The young chef, who was once discriminated against in that same restaurant, had been the protagonist of a historic night. Her menu, a fusion of haute cuisine with popular flavors, drew standing ovations from the most demanding clients. "The most moving moment," she recounted, adjusting her bead necklace, "was when I served a dessert inspired by the pecan pies my mother used to sell on the beach. Seeing those people savoring with reverence something so simple and meaningful." Amanda coordinated the live transmission of the event to the entire country. On screens spread throughout the space, people from different cities shared their own stories of transformation through gastronomy. "It's like a great network of affection," she explained to spectators. "Each story inspires other stories. Each achievement opens the way for new achievements." Emily received a special visit. Mrs. Judith, the 82-year-old lady who had written the letter about her sweets from the Florida coast. She had come especially for the event, bringing with her recipes that had passed through generations. "My granddaughter told me I needed to be here," the lady recounted, moved, "that my knowledge has value, that it needs to be preserved and passed." Dancer, Richard announced a novelty that stirred the spirits even more. The project would be the subject of an international documentary series. Film crews would follow the work of the 5 centers, showing how gastronomy could be an instrument of social transformation. But the most important thing, he emphasized, is that the series will be produced by the project's own students. They will tell their stories with their own voices. Carl conducted a moving lecture about his personal transformation. From prejudiced maitre d' to humanized educator, his story personified the essence of the project. Prejudice, he explained, often stems from fear of our own origins. "When I learned to embrace who I really am, son of Mrs. Fay, pie seller, I discovered my true vocation." In the space dedicated to the corners, George received extraordinary news. His restaurant school model would be implemented in social programs in other countries. A Portuguese delegation was already planning to open the first European corner. "Good food has no borders," he said, his eyes watery, "and dignity is a universal language." Sophia gathered everyone for a special announcement. Besides the international study scholarships, the hotel chain was creating an inclusive gastronomy seal. Establishments that adopted humanized practices and offered real growth opportunities would receive certification. And the most important thing, she added, is that the evaluating committee will be formed by people who lived the transformation firsthand. They know better than anyone what true inclusion means. Jassy, the young Apache woman, presented her own surprise, a recipe book that united ancestral Native American knowledge with contemporary techniques. The income would be reverted to cultural preservation projects in tribal communities. Each recipe in this book, she explained, is a piece of my people's history, and now that history will be told with the respect it deserves. Mary Beth, who kept receiving praise for her gourmet jambalaya, gave an improvised speech that moved everyone. Y'all don't know what it means. For a woman who spent her life being called the Jambalaya Lady, to be recognized as a chef. It's more than a title. It's recognition of our dignity. At the end of the day, Emily gathered all the teams for a special moment. Each center had brought a typical ingredient from its region. Together they would prepare a unique dish, symbolizing the union that the project represented. This dish, she said, while everyone worked in harmony, is like our project. Each ingredient has its history, its value. Together they create something new without losing their individual essences. Lucia, observing the scene, had an inspiration. She began to sketch a new installation. The bead necklaces would transform into a large tree whose fruits would be made with typical ingredients from each region. Because that's what the project does, she explained, showing the drawing. It plants seeds of dignity that bear fruits of transformation. The sun was setting on the horizon when Emily found a moment of quietude. Sitting in a corner of the space, she observed the movement with an overflowing heart. Her bead necklace, Eleanor's inheritance, seemed more alive than ever. The last day of the National Gastronomy Fair dawned with a special atmosphere. The project space, which had become the heart of the event, prepared for a historic moment. The official launch of the Beads That Tell Stories movement, an initiative that would transform the project into a national public policy. Emily arrived early, finding an exciting surprise. In the center of the space, Lucia had worked all night to modify her installation. The necklaces now formed an ascending spiral, each bead representing a story of transformation. Each time someone tells us a new story, explained the artist, I add a new bead. It's a living work, in constant growth, like the project itself. Amanda coordinated the final preparations for the closing ceremony. The teams from the 5 centers had prepared a special presentation, a collaborative dinner where each dish would tell the project's story through flavors. We start with an amuse-bouche from Mrs. Fay, she explained, showing the menu. Pie, in 3 textures, representing how tradition can reinvent itself without losing its essence. Patricia, who had become a national symbol of overcoming, prepared to present the main course, a reinterpretation of popular dishes using haute cuisine techniques. It's not about transforming simple food into something sophisticated, she explained. To journalists, it's about showing that all food deserves respect, all knowledge has value. Richard arrived bringing another surprise. Gastronomy universities from across the country had united to create a new course. Social and transformative gastronomy would be a degree focused on the principles developed by the project. And the best part, he announced, is that 50% of the spots will be reserved for low-income students with full scholarships. Carl, who was finalizing his workshop on humanized service, received exciting news. His manual on hospitality and dignity would be published in 5 languages, taking the project's methodology to other countries. I dedicate this book to my mother, he said, moved. Mrs. Fay, who taught me that true luxury is in how we treat people. George gathered the representatives of the corners spread across the United States for a special moment. Each establishment had developed its own identity, but all maintained the fundamental principle: gastronomy as an instrument of social transformation. Look, he said, pointing to a digital map. We started with a small restaurant, and now we're a network of hope. Sophia presented the first establishment certified with the Inclusive Gastronomy Seal. Among them, to the surprise of many, was the Golden House, completely transformed, after its experience with the project. "It's not enough to change menus," explained the restaurant's new maitre d'. "We need to change mentalities, create truly welcoming environments." Mary Beth, the jambalaya seller, who had become a respected chef, conducted a masterclass on the importance of traditional knowledge. At her side, renowned chefs took notes, learning techniques passed down through generations. "Each seasoning has a story," she taught. "Each preparation method carries the wisdom of our ancestors." Jassy presented the result of a special project, a documentary about contemporary Native American gastronomy, showing how young people from tribes were giving new meaning to their culinary traditions. "We don't just want to preserve," she explained. "We want to show that our culture is alive, dynamic, capable of dialoguing with the present." Mrs. Judith, the 82-year-old sweet maker, was honored as Master of Knowledge. Her expertise, once restricted to the beachside, would now be documented and taught in the project's new schools. "I never thought," she said, moved, "that my old hands still had so much to teach." At the end of the afternoon, Emily gathered everyone for a special ritual. Each participant received a wooden bead and was invited to share a story of transformation. The beads would be united in a new necklace, symbolizing the continuity of the project. "Each bead," explained Emily, "is a seed of change, and as my grandmother Eleanor always said, seeds planted with love always find fertile soil to grow." Richard observed his wife with admiration. The project that was born from a moment of discrimination had been transformed into a national movement of dignity and social transformation. "You know," he said softly, "your grandmother would be proud. You didn't just preserve her legacy, you multiplied it 1,000-fold." The sun was setting when Lucia made a final adjustment to her installation. At the top of the spiral of necklaces, she added a single golden bead shining under the lights of the space. "This one," she explained, "represents all the stories that are yet to come, because now we know that transformation generates transformation." 1 year after the National Gastronomy Fair, Emily was again in her office at the new Dawn Center. The space had grown, now occupying an entire building, but maintained the same welcoming essence of the first days. On the walls, besides the photographs of students, there were newspaper and magazine clippings telling the project's story. The Beads That Tell Stories movement had spread throughout the country, transforming lives and revolutionizing the American gastronomic scene. Amanda entered the room carrying a special report. The project was now present in 50 cities with more than 10,000 graduates. But they weren't just numbers, they were stories of transformation. "Look, Miss Emily," she said, showing a video on her tablet. "Patricia just inaugurated her own restaurant in New Orleans. And guess what? It's in the same neighborhood where she started selling snacks on the street." Patricia's restaurant, Flavors of Memory, had become a phenomenon. Mixing refined techniques with popular flavors, she had created a space where gastronomy was truly democratic. "The most beautiful thing," continued Amanda, "is that she kept the prices accessible and still offers professional training for young people from the community." Richard arrived bringing more encouraging news. The International Scholarship Program had already sent 100 students to study abroad. All had returned and were now multiplying their knowledge in the training centers. "And there's more," he announced, hugging Emily. The project was selected to represent the United States in an international forum on social innovation. Carl, who divided his time between the various centers as a humanization consultant, shared his own news. His book had become a reference in hospitality schools around the world. "But do you know which is the most read chapter?" he said, smiling. "The one that tells the story of my mother, Mrs. Fay, and how she taught me the true meaning of dignity." George appeared for his monthly visit to the center. His original corner had been transformed into a network of school restaurants, each maintaining the family and welcoming character that made it special. But the most important thing, he made a point of emphasizing, is that each corner is unique, with its own identity and history. Sophia, who continued as a fundamental partner of the project, brought a revealing study. Establishments with the Inclusive Gastronomy seal registered greater customer satisfaction, and lower employee turnover. "We are discovered," she explained, "that respect and dignity are not just human values, they're excellent business practices." In the center's courtyard, Lucia gave the finishing touches to her new work, a tree of necklaces that would be replicated in all the project's centers. Each unit would add its own beads, creating a living network of stories. "Art is like gastronomy," she philosophized. "It needs technique, yes, but mainly it needs soul." Emily touched her bead necklace, now accompanied by others she had received throughout the journey. Each told a part of the story, each bead kept a special memory. "You know what moves me the most?" she said to Richard, seeing how a simple story of discrimination was transformed into a movement of liberation and dignity. At the end of that afternoon, Emily gathered the entire team for a special moment. It was time to pass Eleanor's original necklace to the next guardian. "This necklace," she explained, "is not a common family jewel. It's a symbol of resistance, of transformation, of dignity, and now it's time for it to continue its journey." To everyone's surprise, Emily called Amanda forward. The young woman who had begun as a discriminated waitress had become a natural leader, perfectly embodying the values of the project. "Amanda," said Emily, placing the necklace around the young woman's neck, "you're not just receiving a bead necklace, you're receiving the responsibility to keep this story of transformation alive." With tears in her eyes, Amanda hugged Emily. At that moment, they weren't just two women hugging, they were two generations of fighters, united by the same purpose. "Miss Emily," whispered Amanda, "I promise that each bead of this necklace will continue telling stories of dignity and transformation." The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with orange tones that resembled the fire of the stoves where so many lives had been transformed. In the center's courtyard, new and old students gathered for another class. And so, Eleanor's legacy remained alive,